Welcome to the Live, Work, Play Maine podcast, where we bridge the divide between marketing and economic development, with your host, Hillary Dow.
Welcome to the Live, Work, Play Maine podcast, where we help bridge the gap between economic development and marketing. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Roger Millar, who is the Vice President and Director of Grow Smart America's Leadership Institute, which provides technical assistance programs for state and local government. He is also the Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition. Roger is a Fellow of the American Society of Engineers, a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and a certified floodplain manager. His background includes a lot of interesting projects, including, most recently, a member of the Office of Planning and Grants for Missoula, Montana. And he was also part of the leadership team that developed Portland, Oregon's Pearl District and the Portland Streetcar. So welcome, Roger. Roger is joining me today from Billings, Montana. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Good morning.
Hi. Alrighty, so how about you share with us, to get us started, your journey that has brought you to your current position with Grow Smart America?
Sure. Let me tell you a little bit about that. I'm a vice president at Smart Growth America. I grew up an Army brat. I still consider myself an Army brat. So I had a chance to live in Central America and live in Europe when I was growing up. And I saw some different things and had a chance to be in the Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout there, and learned that conservation and citizenship are not mutually opposite things. They're parts of a whole. But after I got out of school, I moved to Portland, Oregon. And Portland had been a place that had always fascinated me. I remember a National Geographic back in the 60s about them cleaning up the Willamette River. And I just thought that would be a cool place to live. So moved out there and worked for the city for a number of years and had a chance to work for a guy named Earl Blumenauer, who was the Commissioner of Public Works at the time. He's now the congressman from Portland. But Earl was right at the beginnings of this smart growth sustainability thing that was going on. And we were very involved in redeveloping the downtown and what was happening in terms of just changing the way the built environment works. I left the city, spent 15 years as a consultant in urban areas and in some very rural places, working with national parks and working with resort towns. And then I went back to the public sector. I was the planning director in the little tiny town of McCall, Idaho, where I ran into the EPA Smart Growth Program. I was actually the very first recipient of a Smart Growth Implementation Assistance project from EPA. So I met a lot of the folks there who are now my colleagues at Smart Growth America. And I left McCall and became the planning director in Missoula, Montana. Did that for a number of years, and then this opportunity to work nationally came up, so here I am.
Awesome. So it sounds like you've touched planning, environmental. I'm sure that has to do with politics and all of the different groups and stakeholders that really all need to come to the table to make smart growth happen.
Oh yeah. I work as a civil engineer. I work as a planner, so I'm all up and down the life cycle of decision making, from the very first kind of aha moment to getting it built on the ground.
Awesome. All right. So you've been a part of a lot of different community projects and worked with a lot of leaders all over the U.S. So what has been one of the most rewarding projects that you've been involved with?
Well, one of the more recent projects that's really been a whole heck of a lot of fun has been our work on the Building Blocks for Sustainable Communities program. We have a grant from EPA to go out and help towns with real short burst activities. We go in and do a 1 or 2 day workshop, which you wouldn't think would make a lot happen. But we've been able to make some really, really cool stuff happen all over the country. I travel a lot. We did 22 workshops last year. We did 15 the year before. We're doing 18 this year. But, I worked in a little tiny town, Port Isabel, Texas, on the Gulf Coast, right on the Mexican border, and helped them think through how to engage their community in their future. They had been working in a very traditional, where we're the city government and you're the citizens, and we just kind of clean the streets and do stuff, but we don't really think about engaging you. And they've come up with a great program for civic engagement. On the other end of the spectrum, we worked in Charlotte, North Carolina. We came in and talked about neighborhood investment and 5 parts of Charlotte that really needed neighborhood investment. And a month after we had that discussion, their city council decided to dedicate $120 million to catalyst projects in those 5 neighborhoods over a 5-year period. And so we, through a little bit of intervention, providing people with a vocabulary, providing people with examples of where things have been done elsewhere, and just helping them get unstuck, we're able to make some really, really cool stuff happen. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's great. I love that the more people communicate, the more conversations they engage in, the more that dialogue helps them build their own knowledge base, their own vocabulary. So that's fantastic. So let's see. You played a leadership role in the development of Portland, Oregon's Pearl District. And I visited the website, and it's just stunning. And so as a marketing professional, I key right in on that. But all of the different elements of getting the different stakeholder groups together, the planning that went into helping a portion of a city or a community at large create a new identity, that is something that's trying to be replicated all over the U.S. So what were some of the commitments that Portland made for that one district in particular that kind of created the catalyst for that emphasis?
That's a great question. When I first moved to Portland in 1982, and I lived in what is now the Pearl District, in one of the very first projects there in the Pearl District, I was it was a scary place. It was a really scary place. Portland had 20% unemployment. We had net outmigration. More people were leaving than coming. And most of downtown was actually surface parking lot. It was not the Portland that you see, in the Portlandia TV series. It's a very different place. And we recognized in Portland, that the era of the big federal project was over, and the traditional approach to urban renewal wasn't working. And so we needed to form partnerships. We needed to engage the public sector and the private sector, and we needed to look at the strengths that we had and how to complement those strengths. The big catalyst in the Pearl District was an old rail yard. Burlington Northern Railroad had run a rail yard there in the north downtown for generations, and it was outmoded. It was old-fashioned, and they had essentially abandoned it. And developer after developer came in with an idea of building a suburban office model or an office park, or we'll build 6 million square feet of Class A office space in the downtown. And the problem with that was the downtown had plenty of office. So the only way that they were going to populate their buildings would be to strip people out of the other buildings. And, obviously the people that own those buildings weren't too excited about that. So nothing was happening. And a group came together, property owners and utilities and bankers, the business sector, and said, this has got to change. What do we do? And the idea came up. This wasn't my idea. There's one of the really cool things about the Pearl is just the dozens of people who had leadership positions. But one of the ideas came up with, rather than competing with the strengths of downtown, why don't we complement those strengths? And what downtown didn't have was housing. We looked regionally at Portland. We anticipated having 500,000 people come to Portland over the next 40 years. That was the talk back in the 90s, is that they're coming, where are they going to live, and why are they going to live there? The central city, wanted to capture a significant fraction of that growth. We didn't want to have everybody out all over the suburbs, sprawling out into the farmland. And we had a lot of policies in place to keep that from happening. But how do we proactively capture that growth without upsetting the people that live in the existing neighborhoods? Because, when you have a stable, prosperous, nice urban neighborhood, you don't want to come in and mess with it. The people get very, very upset when you do. So here's this old rail yard. Housing complementing the office and the commercial that's downtown. And then the question was, the private sector, to make that investment, needed some public investment to happen. And the public sector, to worthwhile to invest the public dollars, needed to see some public policy goals achieved. And one of those public policy goals was dense housing. Another policy goal was affordable housing, and yet another policy goal was providing people with housing and transportation choices. You know, what we do at Smart Growth America, we're all about providing urban and suburban and rural communities with housing and transportation choices near where they work and where they go to school and where they play. And so this was something we developed with the Pearl. So it was really a public-private partnership in the truest sense of the word. You know, we went in and said, you know, there was an old bridge that carried a very busy arterial street over the top of the rail yard. Mm-hmm. And the city said, well, if we take that bridge down and make it a boulevard and an attractive street with street furnishings and parking and all the rest of that, and really bring that into the heart of this area, private sector, what will you do in response? And the private sector said, we'll build at a denser level. They were talking about garden apartments and stuff like that. They said, you know, we'll go to 85 units to the acre. We'll make it dense. We said, great. And if we built the Portland streetcar, you know, what would you do? And they went, you know, denser. And they also committed to affordable housing. So the city was making investments, and they were getting a return on the investment in terms of housing and tax base. And they were getting that housing and that tax base in a way that didn't burden the streets system, because we had the streetcar, we had walking, we had biking, we had people living close to where they worked. You know, all of that stuff worked together. So what was really cool about the Pearl was the city transportation office. I was working as a consultant to them. I was the project manager for master planning the Pearl District, and we had architects and landscape architects and planners and engineers working on my team. We were working for the transportation office, who was working in partnership with the business community. And then we brought the planning office in, we brought the development commission in, lots and lots of really, really smart people working to make incremental change that resulted in a really, really pleasant neighborhood. It complements the downtown. It complements the adjacent, you know, Northwest Portland and other areas. It provides a great transition between the central business district and the Port of Portland, the industrial area. It takes advantage of the Amtrak line that's there, the Cascadia corridor up to Seattle and to Vancouver, British Columbia. It takes advantage of the light rail that comes into downtown from all over the region. And it spawned the streetcar project, which is the downtown circulator system that makes it all work. And so it's a win-win-win all over for the people that made it happen.
Fantastic. As you're explaining that, I'm also thinking to myself, Portland is really, really a very large city. So can we kind of shift gears maybe and have you share with us an example of a project that has been successful, implemented over time, but in a smaller scale community?
Oh, I can think of a couple. You know, McCall, Idaho, population 3,000. I was the community development director there from 2005 to 2007, and McCall had transitioned. It had always been a summer vacation home for people in Boise. In the summer, when it's 120 degrees in Boise, it's 80 in McCall. It's very pleasant. It's kind of like people in Chicago that used to go up to Michigan, or people in Boston and New York that come to Maine, in the summertime. So it's a summer place. But it had also been a resource extraction economy. There was a lumber mill there, and the train came in and took the logs out. There were mines around, and all of that had gone away. The mill was gone. The mines were shut down. It was just this service economy for the resort community. And we were looking at, how do we make it a better place? How do we attract people to live there? How do we attract people to bring their businesses there and the like? And we had a wonderful little downtown. We had it was actually an old urban renewal area that had been lying dormant. And we took that urban renewal area and the money that it was generating, and we used it to redevelop the downtown beach park. It's called Legacy Park. It was a cute little park on the lake that really needed some love. And we completely redid it, made it a wonderful event space, a wonderful place to take a stroll, place to play with your kids. And we developed parking downtown, district parking, so that the businesses had a place, and visitors had a place, and people that were boating on the lake had a place to park their trailers and stuff like that. We used that to develop a streetscape, to put in sidewalks, to put in street trees and benches and guide, informational signs and the like. And that really led to a renewal of the downtown. It was in the middle of a real boom right before the housing bubble burst. The town was growing tremendously. And we put in some really neat things in terms of regulation. We limited formula businesses, so we didn't get a bunch of chain restaurants. We wanted the businesses to be owned by local people. So we limited the chain restaurants to 10% of the total. We limited retail. We prohibited drive-throughs in the downtown because we wanted it to be a walkable place. We provided density bonuses for affordable housing so that workers had places to live. We applied for and were very successful in receiving grant monies to extend sidewalks in the downtown and to do other things. So, it was just a combination of a lot of hard work by a lot of creative people made that little town a really wonderful place. It was hit really hard by the recession. But it's coming back now that the economy's turning around, and as it comes back, it's coming back in a different and very positive way.
Yeah.
So that's a very small example. Missoula was 75,000 people. There, we updated the zoning ordinance, made it more modern. We did a downtown plan, and again, Missoula had a Missoula Downtown Association, a very active group. We had a business improvement district. We had an urban renewal agency. We pooled all of that talent to do a downtown plan that really provides a vision that the community is starting to make happen. The first catalyst project for that was rebuilding a couple of blocks of Higgins Street, the downtown 100% street, but rebuilding it as a complete street with wonderful sidewalks and with actually a cyclovia, a separated bicycle lane. So when you're on the street, there's a lane of traffic in each direction, and then there's parking, and then there's a curb, and then the bike lane is between the parking and the sidewalk. And it's just a different way of doing business. Turned out really cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I definitely love all of Maine, but Lewiston Auburn has a close place in my heart because I live in Auburn, and we recently adopted a complete streets policy between both cities. So it's interesting to see that approach start to take hold on our streets. So
yeah, and we recently awarded you guys one of the top policies in the country.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go off my script a little bit here. As I hear you talk about limiting retail, limiting the number of chain restaurants, and really taking a vision for what you want your downtown to look like and putting in place restrictions that on one hand helps you achieve a vision, but on another hand is taking yourself out of the running for a certain amount of tax base. So I'm sure that there are a lot of issues that come up when you set a vision that is going to have impacts in the ability of recruiting different types of investment to a downtown. So what are some of that's one of the challenges. What are some of the ways you've seen communities kind of stick to a vision and overcome some of those challenges?
Well, yeah, and again, what we did in McCall was right for McCall. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's right for every place, but there are I think there are about 400 communities around the country that have some kind of formula business restriction. I'm not against formula businesses. When I'm moving fast and I need something to eat, it's great to see a McDonald's or a Burger King there. But when I'm in my mountain town enjoying that ambiance, I really don't want to see the Golden Arches down by the beach. I want to see locally owned businesses and things that are unique to the character of the place. Mm-hmm. And, the other thing about those franchise businesses is that most of the money that's made in a franchise business leaves the community. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted was we want tax base and we want employees, people working, but we also want business owners and people who are invested in the community, because it's the people that own the businesses that become the leaders of the community, or a strong set of the leaders of the community. When you take it, you scale it up to a really big city, when you see Fortune 500 businesses, when they're headquartered in a town, they invest in the town. When they just have offices in the town, not so much. So, having that restaurant headquartered in that town, it's not one of gazillion from all over the world. It's Roger's restaurant, and Roger owns property in the city, and Roger pays taxes, and Roger votes, and Roger gets active. That kind of thing is a really cool thing to see. So it does limit you, I suppose, but it limits you in ways that it can be a real positive for maintaining the character of a place. I've seen presentations where people will show you this commercial strip with the Home Depot and the Walmart and the this and the that and the gas station, and they say, where am I? You could be anywhere. You could be in Iowa, you could be in Colorado, you could be in Florida. It's just, you can't tell unless you see a palm tree or a mountain in the background where the heck you are. Is that what you want your community to be? Any place / no place USA? Or do you want it to be uniquely McCall, or uniquely, Missoula, or uniquely Auburn, Lewiston, or uniquely Eastport? There are places that have an identity, and you really need to think about, you want growth, you want prosperity, but you want it on your terms. And so what are your terms? Figure that out locally. There's no set formula. One of the things we do is we provide technical assistance, we provide a vocabulary, we provide examples from other places, but these are local decisions, and you need to decide as a community, as a state, what's right for you and make that happen. But don't be open to anything, because you're going to get that lowest common denominator thing. You're going to be in no place.
Yeah. You actually hit on one of the other questions that I had. When you're setting a community plan and how that ties back to goals at the state level, or ways that the state can either support the community plan, augment it in some way. What are some approaches for communities that are, at that pivotal point of figuring out what that vision looks like? And is it more common for them to really just focus locally, or is there thresholds of the size of community tying it back to the state? How does that work?
Well, the state can be a wonderful partner in economic development. The states have a lot of resources. States are the conduit for a lot of federal resources. States can, you provide that critical mass that makes some things happen. But very rarely are economies, state economies, they're regional. An economy will have a regional shed. I live in Billings, Montana now. Billings is very different from Missoula. We're 350 miles apart. We're all part of one state, but the economy here in Billings actually encompasses a big chunk of eastern Montana, a big chunk of North Dakota and South Dakota and Wyoming. If I were buying a refrigerator, where would I go? Billings. That's the regional economy. So I think economic development and smart growth planning is a community-based or a regional thing. But I think states that recognize that and work with their regions, and I think Maine does that. You have parts of Maine. They provide great resources. They give you access to CDBG grants. They give you access to transportation dollars. They give you access to health dollars, things like that. Having those programs available and at the local level, knowing how to tap those resources is, I think, what's important for that local, regional, state partnership to be really effective. But, just like nationwide, one size fits all, I don't think in a state, one size fits all. There's regional nuances that you really have to take into account.
Yeah, and Maine is a a prime example of that because our state is so big and our geography alone makes us so different.
Oh yeah. I've been, in Presque Isle in February, and it's very different from Portland in August. They're different places.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. So, all right, as a member of the Society of Civil Engineers, you work on the report card for America's infrastructure. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about what that process looks like. And then I've heard of and seen those reports hit the news and kind of the more global view of what those reports mean. But from your perspective, actually coming up with that report, how does the process work coming up with it? And then also from your perspective, what's the intent of that report card?
Well, sure. I'm a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and ASCE is a member organization of people who are civil engineers, about 150,000 of us around the country. We recognized back in the 1990s that somebody needed to point out that our infrastructure is falling apart. We're underinvesting. And so our roads and our water systems and our dams and our levees and our airports, there's real problems that need to be pointed out. And as professionals, we felt we had a professional obligation to do that. So what we did is we gathered experts in different areas, and my particular area of expertise in that group was transportation. And we scanned the available information at the federal level, and we put together a report card where we looked at the condition of the infrastructure, the cost to bring it to a state of good repair, specific examples of problems, and then we graded everything on an A to F scale because, one of the things you need to be able to do is communicate all this technical stuff in a way that a layperson, maybe even a congressperson or a senator would get, when they have that little bit of time to pay attention to the issue. The first report card got a little bit of play. We started doing it on a regular basis, and we have been able to document that the state of America's infrastructure has been in decline for, more than a decade, that the dollar amount to bring it to a state of good repair is huge. And more recently, people have said, okay, you've done a very, very good job of painting a very, very bleak picture of where we're at. What's the solution? And so we've been working on solutions. The federal government needs to play a leadership role, that we need to establish these partnerships, that we need to look at doing business different ways to make these things happen. Another thing that the society has been doing is working with its state organizations. ASCE has a presence in Maine. There are local people who are elected to leadership of the ASCE section in Maine. And so the different states have been doing report cards as well. And we're trying to bring that professional expertise to bear on the issues in your state, as well as we're doing one out here in Montana too. So we've raised the presence of the society. It's great to have the president mention the thing in his State of the Union address. It's great to have senators and congressmen talk about it. We've raised the debate. We've raised the issue. We've quantified the extent of the problem. We're talking about solutions. It'll be really interesting. It's been a long time coming, but it'll be really interesting to see how this country addresses the infrastructure problem that we have. And we'll continue as professionals, we'll continue to play a leadership role in that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for doing that work and all the rest of the great work that you do. I think at this point, I'll wrap up and ask you our final question here on our podcast. And since you've never actually lived in Maine, what is your favorite part of working and playing in Maine?
Well, working in Maine, I've worked up in Aroostook County. I've worked in Eastport. I've worked in the capital. I've worked in Portland, Auburn, Lewiston. What I like about working in Maine is the little communities. I mean, the scale from Portland all the way down, but communities that are actively engaged in making their world a better place. Heroes today are not, they're not these big statues. Heroes today are people who say, this is my town, darn it, and I want to make it a better place. And working with people who have that spirit has been really, really rewarding for me. And then, the vacationing there, I've spent a lot of time at Acadia. I've spent time in the woods. Love it. Just love it. I live in Montana, so I get my share of wilderness, and we've got the Rocky Mountains and the skiing and the rest of that, but very little beachfront property in Montana. So it's great to come to, a place like Bar Harbor or a place like Wiscasset, and see that different terrain and that different way of living, and the combination of the wonderful natural environment and the small towns and the history. It's just really, really special place.
Excellent. Well, we hope that you come back and visit often and bring your talents for sure.
Well, I hope I get the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.